Okay, I think we are going to get started, and we're going to get, it's a little bit after 2, and there are some more people joining us, but we're going to get into everything. And I just want to welcome everybody and a big hello and welcome to our virtual story time. My name is Rachel Sirkin, and I work at the museum at Eldridge Street. And our museum helps to tell the stories of Jewish immigrants like Clara Lemlich, you're going to learn all about today. And we at our museum talk about the role that this Jewish immigrant community played in affecting positive and powerful change. Now, before we get started, and I'm going to hand it over to our fabulous storyteller, Alex, in a minute, I just have a couple of quick announcements. We are so thrilled to have all of you with us today, and we actually have 100 people signed up for this story time. So this is really exciting, and we can't wait to share the story with you. So just a couple of sort of housekeeping things. Just to ensure that everyone is able to hear and enjoy the story, we're going to have everybody on mute for the first part with the story time while Alex is reading. And we will also be displaying the pages of the book so you can see the images and the text and follow along with Alex. And Alex is going to take questions towards the end of the program. So this is important for with questions because we want to hear your questions and have some discussion. And so there are 2 ways that you can ask Alex your question. One, we have the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom. So if you click on the chat, you can type in your questions there, and we can ask the questions to Alex. Or if you want to speak directly with Alex, you can, if you go into participants, there's a little feature at the bottom where it says raise your hand. And if you click on that, this little blue hand will pop up. And that will tell myself and my colleagues that you want to ask a direct question to Alex. And we're doing this because we do want you to know this will be recorded. And later today, we are going to share this video on our YouTube page and social media. So just in case that you don't feel comfortable appearing in the video, I recommend writing your questions in the chat instead. So just giving you those 2 options. And if there's any questions on what to do, just type them into the chat and my colleagues and I will be there to help you. And now I am delighted to introduce you to our storyteller, Alex Delare. Alex is the Associate Director of Education at New York City Children's Theater and is an arts administrator, educator, and historian. She designs educational programming for people of all ages, for theaters, cultural organizations, museums, and her own walking tour company called The History Couple. She also serves as the Museum at Eldridge Street Living History Consultant and has played our Clara Lemlich for us. So I am pleased to introduce you to Alex and to this fantastic story.
So hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're all here. Welcome. As Rachel said, I think we're going to continue to get more folks as we are doing this introduction, but welcome to everybody who's already with me. So again, I'm Alex Delare. I will be your Clara interpreter today as we're reading a story together all about Clara. And as Rachel mentioned, I'm a living history consultant for the museum at Eldridge Street. So what that means is, for some of you, you may have heard that word before, history. So history is something that happened in the past, something that happened before. And as Rachel mentioned, I actually played the role of Clara. So part of my job is to be a living historian, to be an actress and to portray the roles of people that actually were alive a long time ago, like Clara Lemlich. Can we all say her name together? I know that's a new name for some of us today. Can you say that with me? Clara Lemlich? Clara Lemlich. You got it. So in November, I actually portrayed her for the museum at Eldridge Street. And today we're going to be reading a special book all about her story. And as you can see in the title of our event, it's called Time Travel, because today we get to time travel and hear her story. And I'm going to first read the book to you. And then because Clara was a real person, at the end of our story time, I'm also going to show you pictures of the real Clara. Also, you get to see a picture of me in costume playing Clara. Pictures from the time, pictures of when she was alive and things that she was doing at the time in New York City, because our story takes place in New York. And at the very end, then we'll take questions, as Rachel showed you. So let's get started. So time travel story time, Brave Girl, Clara and the Shirtwaist Makers Strike. So I'm gonna move you all down on the side of my screen here so I can see my screen with all of you. So that word that you just heard me say, brave, that's a word that's a pretty short word, right? It's only 5 letters long, but it has a lot of meaning. So I'd love for you to think for just a moment about that word brave. What do you think that word brave means? What does that word brave mean to you? Yeah, there's a lot in that word brave, right? I want to share my definition with all of you. So brave means even when something is scary or dangerous, you stand up to it anyway. Can we do that? We stand up to it anyway. So it takes a lot to be brave because, as you heard in the definition, it's when something is really scary or even very dangerous and we decide, you know what, I'm going to stand up to it anyway. So we're going to hear a very special story about a girl who was very brave. So on the screen here, you're going to see a picture of our book. And here is a copy of it. I'm going to be holding it as well. And you can see it says Brave Girl, Clara and the Shirtwaist Makers Strike of 1909. Do you all remember that we're talking about something that happened in history? So now we know what year it was happening in, 1909. So that's over 100 years ago. Now, if you're looking at the cover of the book, whether it's the one I'm holding or the one on your screen, you're going to see our brave girl. This is Clara Lemlich. And in her hand, I see a sign. It says the word strike. Can you say that with me? Strike. We're going to be doing that a lot today. And often when people say the word strike, they also put their hand in a fist and they say strike. Can we all do that together? Strike. Great. Now in this photo, or this drawing rather, you can see that there's also lots of people behind Clara, and they're also all holding signs that say strike, and they're also all standing together. So something I think we're figuring out from the title of our story is that even though Clara is very important, it sounds like she was not alone. She got a lot of people to work with her. And I see a lot of buildings behind her, because do you remember where this story takes place? It takes place in New York City. So this was written by Michelle Markle, and the pictures are by Melissa Sweet. So this is our brave girl, Clara and the Shirtwaist Makers Strike of 1909. So let's go to the first page. So on the screen here, there are no words, but this is the first page of our book. And what I see in this picture is a huge ship. This is called a steamship. And in this boat, I can see seagulls flying overhead. I see these huge poles on the top of the boat that are going to be pushing out steam, puffs of steam to help our boat move. And I see all these people standing on the top of the boat. And I see one of them pointing out into the distance. Can you point with me? Yeah, I wonder what they're pointing at. Let's find out. Ooh, I see what they're pointing at. I even see someone else pointing into the distance. Do you see what they're pointing at? Yeah, that is maybe if you live in New York City, and even if you don't, something that maybe you're very familiar with. This is the Statue of Liberty, or Lady Liberty. And as we can see, this boat is pulling into what's called the harbor. So that's where the land meets the sea. And in front of the land is the Statue of Liberty. So we know that this boat is pulling in to New York City. So let's see, what's the first page of our book say? A steamship pulls into the harbor carrying hundreds of immigrants and a surprise for New York City. I wonder what that surprise could be. So we know the steamship is pulling in and they're carrying hundreds of immigrants. So you might be wondering, what's an immigrant? So an immigrant is a person who leaves their home country to live in a new country. So let's find out what's going to happen next. Oh, wow. Do you see this picture of the inside of our boat? There are so many people all in different lines on our boat. And I see all these people, they're carrying all this stuff with them. Do you see that? They're carrying sacks on their back and suitcases. I see one person at the bottom of the screen carrying a huge box. I see in the very bottom of the boat, people have hung up their clothes. Looks like they've been on this boat for a really long time. So this boat, there's multiple levels to it, and people would have paid different amounts of money to ride on this boat when Clara was coming to America. And in the very distance, we can see the Statue of Liberty. Now, we just learned what an immigrant is. An immigrant is someone that moves from one country to another. So that means that these people on this boat were leaving where they were coming from to move to a new place. Have any of you ever moved before? Yeah, I've moved before too. It takes a lot of bravery. Do you remember that word we talked about earlier? Bravery. It takes a lot of bravery to move somewhere new and start over somewhere else. And in this case of all these immigrants, they had to move with all of their belongings with them. So let's see what happens next. The surprise! We found out what our surprise is. The surprise is dirt poor, just 5 feet tall, and hardly speaks a word of English. Her name, we know this one, her name is Clara Lemlich. This girl's got grit and she's going to prove it. Look out, New York. Can we say that? Look out, New York. Good job. So the picture on the screen here, this looks like an old photo album, a sheet in an old photo album, and I think that's Clara. We've seen her before on the cover of our book, and now we can see her now, just like those other immigrants in the boat that we just saw. In this picture, she's carrying a bag, she's carrying a sack, and she's got 2 people behind her. Those are her parents, her mom and dad, and they all came here from Ukraine. So they came from another country and they moved here to America. Now we know that they moved to New York City, but does anybody recognize the really long red building behind them? Yeah, that's Ellis Island. So before immigrants at this time period could come to America, they had to first go through Ellis Island and go through a checkpoint to make sure that they were safe and healthy. So it looks like they're leaving Ellis Island. So luckily, they are safe, they are healthy, they can come to America. And one of the words we just learned on this page is that our Clara, we know she's brave, but she's also got grit, which means that she has toughness and courage. Clara knows in her bones what is right and what is wrong. What's wrong begins a few weeks after the Lemlichs move into their tenement in America. No one will hire Clara's father. They will, however, hire Clara. That's right, Clara. Companies are hiring thousands of immigrant girls to make blouses, to make coats, and nightgowns and other women's clothing. They earn only a few dollars a month, but it helps pay for their food and for their rent. So instead of carrying books to school, many girls are carrying sewing machines to work. Clara becomes a garment worker. Wow, so we just learned a lot, right? So we learned that Clara, when she first arrives to America, she's able to get a job, but her dad can't. Now in the picture we just saw, Clara looks really young, right? Clara was only 16 years old when she came to America. And even though she was only 16, she was able to get a job, even though her dad couldn't. Do you remember what she does for work? She makes clothes. She works as a garment worker making those clothes. And she needs that money, and her family needs that money because they need to be able to pay for food so they can eat, but they also have to pay for their rent. And so rent is money that you pay to the owner of a home so that you can live there. So it sounds like Clara has a lot of responsibilities. So this is a picture of Clara, and she's walking to work. Can we do that? Can we walk to work? Yeah. And you'll notice that Clara is not alone in this picture. She is surrounded by buildings. Those are what we just heard about. Those are called tenement buildings. And some of you may have heard that word before, tenement. So a tenement is another word for an apartment building, and that's a place where families live. And so we can see in the picture there's families, there's people that are working, we can see there's clothing hanging, so people aren't just living in their homes, but you can also see them working around their homes, doing the wash, carrying things from one factory to another. And in Clara's case, she's carrying a really big bag. Do you remember what workers had to carry sometimes to their jobs? They had to carry sewing machines. We're going to see a picture of a sewing machine later. They are very heavy, so that's a lot of work to carry that from place to place. From dawn to dusk, so from in the morning to the night, she's locked up in a factory. So a factory is a place where things are made. There are rows and rows of young women bent over their tables, stitching collars, sleeves, and cuffs as fast as they can. Hurry up, the bosses yell. Rat-a-tat-tat, hisses Clara's machine. The sunless room is stuffy from all the bodies crammed inside. There are 2 filthy toilets, 1 sink, and 3 towels for 300 girls to share. Wow, So in this picture, it might be a little hard to see. There are rows of all of these people working in this factory, and all of these people are girls just like Clara. And they're all working on those sewing machines. So we would have heard that sound all day long, that rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. And our boss, the person that runs the factory, yelling us saying, go faster, go faster, go faster. So it'd be a lot of stress that we would be feeling at our jobs. Clara learns the rules. If you're a few minutes late, you lose half a day's pay. If you prick your finger and you bleed on the cloth, you're fined. It happens a second time, you're fired. Their doors are locked and you're inspected every night before you leave to be sure you haven't stolen anything from the factory. But Clara is uncrushable. Oh, I love that word, don't you? Uncrushable. Uncrushable means not able to be broken. That's kind of like brave, to be uncrushable. She wants to read. She wants to learn. At the end of her shift, though her eyes are hurt from straining in the gaslight and her back is hurt from hunching over the sewing machine, she walks to the library. Can we walk to the library? Let's walk to the library. Good job. And in this picture, we can see Clara reading a book. So even after her long days, she keeps going. As the weeks grind by, Clara makes friends with the other factory girls. At lunch, they share stories and secrets as if they were in school, where they belong. Can I tell you a secret? I think that Clara is very brave. Do you want to tell me a secret? It's nice to share secrets. By sharing secrets, it makes us feel like we are together. Even if we're scared or we're feeling worried, if we tell each other secrets and we come together, it makes us feel better. But Clara smolders with anger. That means she has this strong emotion that she can't keep hidden, not just for herself, but for all the factory girls who are working like slaves. This was not the America she imagined. The men at the factory tell her they've been trying to get the workers to team up into a union. That's a big word, union. So a union is a group of workers that protect each other by working together. So they tell her they're going to strike. They're going to refuse to work until the bosses treat them better. But the men don't think the ladies are tough enough. So they want to strike. So what would happen is, when the workers tell them, get to work, all the workers would say, no. Strike. Until you treat me better, I'm not working. Can we all say that? Strike, strike, strike. That's right. Good job. But in this case, the men don't want the girls to strike. So Clara says, not tough enough because they're girls? Oh, yes, they are. Clara knows it. She'll show them. Can we show them? We put our hands on our hips and say, we'll show them. Yeah, good job. From then on, at the sewing tables and on the street corners, Clara urges the girls to fight for their rights. So in this big building, this is a really big factory. This is the Triangle Waist Company, where they made cloaks or coats and suits, and they had clothing specials. You see all these people in the windows with their signs and all saying, strike, 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 strike. When the seamstresses, the people who sew the garments, are overworked, they say strike. When they're underpaid, they say strike. When they're punished for speaking up, they all cry strike. And the girls do. So this is a picture of girls with Claire in the front, and they have banners that they're wearing over their clothes that say picket on them. So picket means if you don't think your work is paying you what you deserve, you stand in front of your workplace and don't let other people go in and protest and say, we need better wages. We need to be treated better. So they're picketing and they're standing up for their rights and standing out all together. And these signs they all say strike, but they also have something on them called an acronym. So acronym are letters that are put together that stand for larger words, and it says ILGWU. So that means the International Lady Garment Workers Union. So these girls convince the men that they should join their union, who are making clothes and saying, we should be treated better. Each time Clara leads a walkout, that's where she gets the workers to walk out of their jobs with her, the bosses fire her. Each time she pickets, her life is in danger. The bosses hire men to beat her and the other strikers. The police arrest her 17 times. They break 6 of her ribs, but they can't break her spirit. It's shatterproof. That's another really big word, right? Just kind of like uncrushable. It means unbreakable. Very, very strong. Clara hides her bruises from her parents. A few days later, she's on the picket line again. So that's where she's, again, standing up with other workers and not letting them go in because they're all striking. And the other girls think, well, if she can do it, we can do it. Can we say that? If she can do it, we can do it. For weeks, the small strikes go on, but the bosses find other young women to do the work for the same low pay and long hours. So in this picture, we can see Clara's trying to sneak off from her tenement apartment and carrying her strike sign with her, but trying to hide it so her family doesn't see. We must do something bigger, thinks Clara and other union leaders, something huge, a giant strike at every garment factory in the city. So the union holds a meeting. Throngs, that means a large group of people. They pack the seat, they pack the aisles, the walls, and the hall thrums. That means it makes a really low and steady sound. With excitement, Clara listens to speech after speech. So this is a room at Cooper Union, and we can see all of these people, mainly girls, all gathered together. And there's so many people, we can only even see little dots in the distance of all of their faces gathered to hear these speeches. The speakers, mostly men, want everyone to be careful. Can we say that? Be careful. Be careful. 2 hours pass. Oh, no one recommends a general strike. Finally, the most powerful union leader in the country goes up to the podium. Not even he proposes action. So Clara does. That's right, Clara! She calls out from the front of the hall. The crowd lifts her up, and we can see here, they lift her to the stage where she shouts in Yiddish, and we can see what she says in Yiddish on the screen. Unser einziger Ausweg ist a general strike. So let's find out, what does that mean? I have no further patience for talk. I move that we go on a general strike. Can we all do that? I have no further patience for talk. I move that we go on a general strike. And look at all the people in the audience. They're all doing that same motion with their fists together. Strike. And in the background, you can see a sign that says unity is strength, meaning if we come together, we are stronger. And she starts the largest walkout of women workers in U.S. history. And in fact, after she said that, she got a round of applause for 5 whole minutes. That's amazing, right? The next morning, New York City is stunned by the sight of thousands of young women streaming from the factories. One newspaper calls it an army. Others call it a revolt. So that's an act that when you won't accept someone else's control. It's a revolt of the girls, for some are only 12 years old. So we can see all these women streaming in all together, and people are stunned by it. We're not stunned, right? Because Clara has started a revolution. And the rest are barely in their teens. In the coming weeks, Clara is called a hero. She lights up chilly union halls with her fiery pep talks. Her singing lifts the spirits of the picketers, and when a group of thugs approaches, she yells, "Stand fast, girls." Can we say that? Stand fast, girls. Good job. So even when people tell them no, they just keep going. And they do. Wow, all winter long, even in the bitter cold. Can we pretend that we're really cold? So cold. In their cheap, thin coats, they're tired and starving and scared, but the girls, they walk aside alongside the men on the icy sidewalks of the picket line. They spill out of the union halls, blocking the roads, filling street corners and public squares. Newspapers write stories about them. College girls raise money for them. Rich women, swathed in fur coats, picket with the factory girls. By the time the strike is over, hundreds of bosses agree to let their staff form unions. They shorten the work week and they raise salaries. The strike emboldens thousands of women to walk out of garment factories in Philadelphia and Chicago. So do you remember? Our story takes place in New York. So that means people are so inspired that even in other major cities in America, like Philadelphia and Chicago, other people are standing up and saying, it's not just New York that needs change, we all need change. So these are some of the headlines of the papers down below saying, garment workers strike, uprising of 20,000. That's how many women walked out, 20,000. And then we've heard that acronym before, the ILGW strike. And here's one of the covers of the newspaper. It says, Revolt of the Girls. Can we say that? Revolt of the Girls. And the strike convinces Clara to keep fighting for the rights of workers. Her throat is hoarse, her feet are sore, but she has helped thousands of people, proving that in America, wrongs can be righted. Warriors can wear skirts and blouses, and the bravest hearts may beat in girls only 5 feet tall. So this is a picture, this is the last picture of our book, and this is a picture of Clara in the same outfit that we saw in the front of our story. And she's looking out. Can we look out just like Clara is? She's looking out into the distance. And what does she see? She sees the Statue of Liberty. So that's just where she came as an immigrant, all the way from Ukraine. And she came here and she started this huge revolution, this revolt that changed the world. So can we give Clara and the uprising of 20,000, as they became called after that, a big round of applause? Good job. So what I'd like to share with you now that we've finished our story, is I want to show you a picture of the real Clara Lemlich, because as I told you, she was a real person. And I also want to show you a picture of me when I played Clara at the museum. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah, there's Clara and me. So on the left in black and white, that is the real Clara Lemlich. And she has her hands behind her back in a pose. She looks very sassy to me. I think she looks very opinionated and just very striking. Can we make a pose just like Clara? Good job. And then I am here over on the right in my costume, because if you remember, that's my job. I'm a living history consultant, so I play the role of people like Clara. And I'm wearing one of those banners that we saw in our book. It says, instead of picket though, mine says strikers. Remember, we were all saying strike during our story, so I'm wearing something that says strikers. So what I'd like to show you now are pictures of some of these women that came together and were a part of the strike. So this is called the Uprising of 20,000 in 1909. So these are pictures of, this picture is mainly of women. I see a couple men in this picture, but mainly it was women. And they all were coming together in this time to fight for better wages. So that means better money that was coming in for the work that they did, for a shorter work week, because they were working 7 days a week. They were fighting to be able to have holidays and days off and be able to be treated as human beings. So there's all these women and people coming together to fight for this. And one day after Clara gave her big speech at Cooper Union, the next day, 15,000 people walked out of their place of work, mainly women, because of Clara. So she is an inspiration. So the next picture here, the picture on the left just looks like some of the pictures we saw in our book, with women wearing the picket signs for Lady Taylor strikes. And the picture on the right is, again, more women, and I can see some signs written in Yiddish, which is the language that we know that Clara spoke. And again, these are Jewish women that are coming together, and women that were coming from all over as new immigrants to this country to say, we deserve to be treated better. This picture, that's just like at the very beginning of our book. This is a big, huge steamship that was pulling into the New York City harbor, and they're all looking toward the camera, but we know that they were actually looking for the first time at New York City. And do you remember, what's the first thing that you see when you pull into the New York City harbor? The Statue of Liberty. So they were all seeing the Statue of Liberty. How do you think they might have felt in this picture? Yeah, a lot of different emotions, right? Maybe they felt sad, maybe they felt really excited, maybe they felt nervous. Lots of different feelings as they were coming here with their hopes and their dreams for their futures, just like Clara. And where they moved to, just like Clara did, was to a neighborhood called the Lower East Side, which is actually where the museum at Eldridge Street is located, in the Lower East Side. So this picture shows you what life was like in the early 1900s in New York City. So I can see horses driving carriages full of goods. I can see people buying things from an open market. I see lots of families and lots of those buildings that we talked about called tenements, where immigrant families first coming to America would have lived. And these are pictures of tenements. So the picture on the far left, we can see some of these tenement buildings. They were multi-floored buildings where on each floor multiple families would live. And sometimes in even one apartment, multiple families lived in them. Most tenement buildings did not, at this time period when Clara was living there, wouldn't have had inside toilets or running water, so they would have had to go outside to a shared yard where they would have been able to get those amenities for themselves. Or if you were lucky, there might be one toilet in the hallway of your floor of your building, and you would all share that with all the residents on your floor. This picture on the right is again of tenements, but you can see people hanging their laundry outside, people coming together on the fire escapes, which is those mechanisms that are popped out from the building, which is, of course, in cases of fire where you would go for safety, but most people would go there to spend time together and relax and play games, a place where you could tell secrets and communicate with each other. And these are pictures of the kind of factories, or what was also called a sweatshop, where people like Clara worked. So the picture on the left is actually a home sweatshop or a home factory. So a lot of people not only lived in their homes, but they also worked in their homes. So this is a picture of people working in their home, being able to make clothing. So not only working, but also living in the same space. Over on the right is more like the pictures that we saw in our book, with all of these women packed rows and rows of workers in one factory space, all working in really close quarters. And we can imagine if we could listen in on this picture, we'd probably be hearing the sewing machines and the sounds of the cutting of the scissors, that sound that we heard, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, as they're all working together. And we know from the cover of our book that Clara was a shirtwaist maker. So you might have been wondering, what's a shirtwaist? So this is a picture on the right of an actual shirtwaist, and this is a newspaper clipping showing off the many uses of shirtwaists at the time. So what they were is that women in the early 1900s would have been wearing a lot of dresses. And so shirtwaists were a new idea that essentially you could have two pieces of clothing. You would have a skirt, and then you would also have a shirt, which would match your bottom, your skirt, very well. So that top, that shirt, became known as a shirtwaist. So that's what a shirtwaist was. So she was making the tops of these dresses, or what were called shirtwaists, in her work. And you might have been wondering, what were they using? How are they making all these clothes? These are some of the tools of the garment trade. So on the left, you can see a needle and a thimble. So this is for people that were sewing things by hand. This is what they would have been using. And this is some of the different colors of thread that they might have been using. So there's yellow and purple and blue and orange. And then finally, we heard a lot about sewing machines today. This is a Singer sewing machine. So people would have been sewing and putting cloth through them, so they could be sewing different pieces of clothing by hand and also using a machine to help them. And I don't know about you, that picture makes that sewing machine look really heavy. So if you remember, Clara would have been carrying that from her home all the way to work all the time. So that would have been really heavy. And then there's a pattern tracer. So that's what helps make patterns into fabrics that you're working on. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of what it was like in the early 1900s when Clara was coming here, because we saw drawings of it, but I thought it would be really helpful for you to get to see real pictures to remember that we are time traveling. We're remembering history together. So going back to the title of our book, and sort of what our book is all about, is this idea of bravery and of courage. So a question I really wanted to ask all of you is there someone in your life that you consider to be brave? And so Rachel is actually going to help me out with this part She is going to help me get your responses. As Rachel recommended, you can do this by putting them into the chat box, or you can raise your hand within Zoom as well, and she can tell me some of your ideas. But again, this word bravery, it's a really important word, and there's a lot of meaning to it. But I'd love for you to think about if there's someone in your life that you would think of as being very brave, and then Rachel will share them with me.
We can take a minute to let people maybe think of their responses. But Alex, can I ask you the question? Is there someone that you consider to be brave in your life?
Right now, I am so inspired by all the teachers in my life who I can go to, and mentors that I can ask questions of right now. And it's a really tough time in our country, and being able to turn to mentors and friends who are just so thoughtful and have such warm hearts, and educators in my life and teachers are the people that I'm thinking right now so much about.
There are a couple of responses, Alex. So Michael says that his aunt is brave, and then Oliver writes, "My mommy is brave. My mommy fought cancer," which is that's a very brave thing to have to fight against.
Oh, I love both of those answers. My aunt, I think, is also very brave, so I absolutely hear that. And I hear that about moms too. My mom is actually even on this right now, listening in on Zoom. And I think my mom is very brave as well. She's also a teacher, like I mentioned. And Oliver, that's very brave what your mom went through, certainly. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Yvonne writes, "My dad, who is a retired police officer and is a former veteran, and many of my friends who are or were in the military."
I love that. Absolutely. So right now we're thinking maybe a lot about essential workers and people that, especially during this pandemic time, that it's really dangerous. Like we talked about, being brave is going out even when it's really dangerous. And police officers and people that are warriors, like we talked about that word with Clara, being a warrior and going out and striking is kind of like being a warrior, but being a veteran, risking your life like that, it takes a lot of bravery to do that. It means you really believe in something very much to be able to do that.
And Michael writes, "I am brave too."
I love it. It's important to think about how we're brave. That's something I think about a lot. What are things that I can do to be brave? How can I be helpful and show my bravery? I think sometimes even just saying thank you to someone that we don't know, or telling somebody that you love them, even when I feel scary, I think that's all really brave. But I think sometimes recognizing the power that we have of things that we can say are really brave as well.
And Oliver also writes, "My dad is brave because he goes to work during these times." Yeah.
Oh, Oliver, absolutely. Like we talked about, it's super tough right now. Absolutely. And it's very unsafe. So to know loved ones, especially like our caregivers and our fathers, to be going out even during this time, these unsafe times, that is absolutely very brave, Oliver. I couldn't agree more.
Okay. And this is from Meg and Ash. They write, "My great great aunt Carmela because she lost a leg."
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot of bravery when we get hurt to keep going. If you remember in our story, Clara, she actually breaks her ribs. Like those are whole parts of her body, and she kept going. And so when we get hurt, even if we have to rest for a while before we can pick ourselves up again, because sometimes it takes a long time to recover when we're sick or when we're hurt, to be able to do that in any way it's very brave.
And just to remind everyone, if you came in a little late to the chat, so you definitely can keep typing in your questions and we can convey them to Alex. But also, if you wanted to ask her your question directly, if you raise your hand by clicking on participants and the raise your hand feature, we can unmute you and you can ask Alex your question directly.
With that in mind, my last question for all of you, and then I would love to hear these questions that are coming in. This is so exciting. Is I'm thinking a lot about how can we be change makers in our communities? How can young people change the world? So I'd love to hear from you all if there's anything that you think that you could do to help your community, to help change the world, change how things are today. While Rachel is reading these, I know something that I think about a lot is what Mr. Rogers once said. He said to look to the helpers, look to the people who are doing the helping and seeing what are they doing and how can I do and do more of what they are doing to help my community? Because often the people that are helping, even in times of stress and hardship, are the ones that I find the most inspiring. Because we talked about they're often going out when it's dangerous or when it's scary, and they're doing that because they believe in something so strongly. Like, for example, doctors who are going out right now and helping people who are sick, even though they might get sick themselves, is very brave.
So Oliver has another really, this is actually really sweet, but also really
great, Oliver.
I love Oliver. Helping bees. Like that's something like helping bees, because if they're gone, there won't be food. So like doing advocacy for the environment and helping our animals, that's such an important job for young people to do.
Oh, I love that, Oliver. I'm also a really big fan of honey, so selfishly, I really want to take care of our bees. But in all seriousness, helping our environment and taking care of what we have, so it's here for generations after us. Not just thinking about ourselves, but what will come after us. What will our children have? What will our children's children have? Is very important. And so part of that is taking care of even something as small as a bee is actually really huge.
So Alex, while we're waiting on people, if they have other questions, a question I want to ask you is, because you've played, oh, wait, before I ask, tell us my question. So Megan Ash has also wrote something really important. They wrote stand up to racism.
Absolutely. That is very important, to stand up to racism. And that can be I think that maybe it's sometimes that's a really big word too. What is racism, right? That is like what we talked about a little bit already, like looking to the helpers, people that are doing good things in our world. But if you're not familiar with that word racism, I think that's something that you should certainly learn about. But standing up to racism, I think a simple way to get started, if you're not sure what that means or how to identify that, is looking to thinking about what does it mean to be kind. I know that that's something I think about a lot. How am I being kind? How am I being generous? How am I being thoughtful? And if you see someone not being kind, or if you've ever had someone not be kind to you, it really hurts. So one of the underlying parts of racism is the lack of kindness. And so there's a lot of anger right now that's happening right now, and protests that are happening right now because of people not being kind to people. And particularly in the case of what's happening today, people not being kind to Black people. So it's been happening for a long time in our country. And so today people are saying enough is enough and we need to make a change. So again, thinking about how can we be helpful in this time is through being kind and generous and listening. Listening is really hard, but listening to other people around us, even if they look different than us or have different opinions than us, but really listening to them with an open heart and an open mind.
Yeah, but I want to add, there's a comment from Ruth B. Ruth writes, we can help our communities by supporting the brave young people who are demonstrating for racial justice right now. So we talk about Clara as a young person, changing the world and supporting young people today for this cause.
Absolutely. That's a huge one. Thinking about what can we do to help our community. Maybe it is that you make a drawing, something that you're really proud of, or maybe you write something down that you want to share with somebody about how you're feeling right now. And maybe you yourself are one of those young people that decide to go out with a grown-up and protest right now, just like Clara did. Or maybe it's something that you just have a conversation with a grown-up about what's going on. Those are all really brave actions right now.
And if people want to keep adding or adding to the comments and questions. So a question I just wanted to ask you, Alex, because you have, we saw that great picture of you as Clara. So what was the process? What things did you have to learn or do to, learn how to play Clara Lemlich?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is, I feel very lucky. The museum at Elder Street are incredible historians, so they would supply me with incredible material that I would read and digest and have to learn, and then think a lot about, as a costume interpreter is what I did, is where you take history and you essentially think about, how do I make this interactive? So for example, we know that Clara you know, protested, but what are some of the things that she might have said to some of the people that were in her life? So we actually have photos of some of Clara's friends. So I thought a lot about what were some of the conversations that her and her friends might be having in a factory about what was going on outside. What are things that she might be thinking about? How would it feel? A lot of it is about feelings. So thinking about, we know that Clara would come home really late at night after working all day in the factory, and she'd be really tired. And then even though she was really tired, she would still go to the library. And even later on, we know that even when she stopped going to the library, because she was like, I want to do more learning than this. So she went to schools to keep learning. She went to night school. She even went to learn all about socialism later in her life, which then drew her more into protesting. But she just wanted to be a constant learner, which would mean that she would come home really tired. So I would think a lot about, when have I felt really tired? What did that feel like? And how would I communicate that if I was Clara? I also did a lot of research on, she didn't speak English when she first came to our country. She spoke Yiddish, and we also know that she spoke Russian. So I also had to practice my Yiddish accent quite a lot and make sure I was prepared. I also thought a lot about what were phrases from the time that people said, and trying to think about how could I bring that into my vernacular, how I would talk, because some of the things that I say as me, Clara would not have said in her time. So for example, instead of saying things like, can we go to the factory? She would say, shall we go to the factory? So like very old-fashioned English that I wouldn't use, but Clara would have used. So thinking about when I say things and how I frame things, it's really important to think about the time period, which again is all of that, like going back into history.
Yeah, do we have other questions for Alex about being a costume interpreter? Time for a few more questions, if anyone would like to ask. And Alex, while we're waiting just to see if anyone has some last questions before we wrap up our story time, what would you say is when you were learning to play the role of Clara, like maybe an object, something about, you talked about you showed a bunch of different objects to us, but an object that maybe really represents Clara?
Object that really represents Clara. Well, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know how many of you guys ever do dress up at home, where you dress up as a character. I know for me as an actor, it really helps when I put on a costume. I know that as much as I playing around with becoming Clara, I didn't feel like Clara till I had to wear something from the time. And even when I was wearing something from the time, I didn't quite feel like Clara. But the minute I put on that banner that you saw in the picture, that said, if you remember, it said, in Clara's case, it said strikers. And for mine, it said strikers. Some people said picket on theirs. That really made me feel like Clara, feeling like I was really standing up for something. It made me have like a different sense of posture. It made me feel very strong and courageous. So and you know, and sometimes during my program, I would have objects, like I showed people like the pattern tracer and objects like that, or a book that Clara would read, and that all felt really good. But there was something about the costume that I know really made me feel like her. I also had shoes that I was wearing with a little bit of a heel, which made me again feel taller and braver, because you know Clara was not very tall, and neither am I. But when I put some heels on, it gave me the sense of I just felt literally larger, and I felt more in control, and that really helped me, I feel like, create the presence of Clara, because I feel like she is a very big figure, who really takes up a lot of space, and even though we actually talk about how she's a girl, she was actually 23 years old when she actually spoke up. So, but sometimes I think that as girls or as young people, we might feel small, but sometimes we put on a costume or we find that piece that makes us feel stronger. It makes us feel that much taller, literally by when we're standing up, but maybe even in our hearts, it makes us feel that sense of courage and bravery.
That's great. And there's a question here, and maybe you could help me with this one, Alex. do we know the materials that Clara and her colleagues would have used to make the shirtwaist? Like what kinds of like fabrics were they using?
I don't know offhand exactly what types of fabrics they would have been using, but I know that in order to, like, people would do what's called piecework. So all different members of the factory who were making those clothes, like we talked about, there'd be girls or women that would specialize in just making like the cuffs, for example, of the shirt, or just the sleeves, or even seams to add like little details to the cuffs. That was considered to be a very specific job. So I don't know so much about like maybe the exact fabrics and materials, but certainly it was a lot of literal pieces to be able to put together one larger garment. So one worker might specialize literally in just one tiny part of a garment to be able to put it all together.
Yeah. So Alex, I think we're about to run out of time for questions, but as we wrap things up, and big thank you for reading this incredible story to us. If people do have questions or want to know more about Clara and the Shirtwaist Strike, do you have some information about that or where they can turn to?
Absolutely, Rachel. What a great way to take us to our last slide. So on our last slide here, to Rachel's point, if you have any additional questions about Clara Lemlich or you want to learn more about the museum, you can email Nancy, and this is her email up here on the screen. She gave you a little wave just now, or you can also visit the Eldridge Street's website at eldridge.org. Also, if you have a specific question about Clara or about costumed interpretation or some of the living history consultancy work I've done, I'm happy to answer your questions, and I've provided my email on the screen as well. But as Rachel said, it has been such a pleasure to work with the museum at Eldridge Street today and this past fall on creating and telling the story of Clara. I hope this gave you some inspiration for not just today, but what's going on in the world right now. How can we all be uncrushable and unshatterable even in these times where we feel sad or scared or not sure? But Clara, she was so brave. And if we can take a little bit of that Clara inside our hearts, I think that will all make us get through these times that we're going through right now.
Alex, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you and all of you here today with us to hear this story and for your wonderful questions. And we wish all of you a great weekend. And yeah, we'll see you hopefully for a future program really soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Take care. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.